Hey, what's happening, everybody? I'm Anthony DeJoya, and thank you, as always, for stopping by the Silver Screen Analysis. This is the first episode of Primetime. This is going to be a series devoted to just covering some of the best single years from our biggest film stars. And to kick this series off, we're jumping back to 1993 to cover the making of Sylvester Stallone's two blockbuster action hits, Cliffhanger and Demolition Man. Now, it's safe to say the 90s was an eccentric and over-the-top decade for cinema. Budgets were bigger than ever, star power was at its peak, special effects technology and what could be done was just being pushed to higher levels with each passing year. The decade would go on to put out some of the biggest movies we've ever seen, and at the time, none of them was as big as the 1993 action thriller Cliffhanger, and none was more purely entertaining than Demolition Man.
Is it cold in here, or is it just me?
Now, it was the turn of the decade, the 90s were officially here, and while Stallone was a certified box office beast in the 80s, the early 90s saw the beginning of a decline in his popularity. Now, it's no secret and to no surprise that Sylvester Stallone, outside of the first couple Rocky flicks and maybe First Blood, was never considered a critical darling. The critics rarely praised Stallone's movies during his run of superstardom, but they frequently made a ton of money, and in Hollywood, that's all that counts. Cash. However, as Stallone stepped into the new decade, suddenly even his ability to put butts in seats was beginning to decline. 1990 would see him reprise his role as Balboa in Rocky V. Of course, financially it was a success, pulling in nearly $120 million worldwide on a $42 million budget, but publicly and critically it was panned, and it just wasn't a good movie, which soured a lot of fans that bought tickets to see what would become the weakest entry in the Balboa legacy. Just a solemn, anticlimactic movie that was depressing in all the wrong ways. Then in 1991, Stallone would step into the genre of traditional comedy in the Depression-era set film Oscar, leaving the action persona behind. Stallone played a mob boss, and I will defend this movie a little bit, but it was critically panned and audiences didn't really like it either, mostly because Stallone just wasn't in action movie mode, and it only brought in a little bit more than $23 million on a $35 million budget. So naturally, this was not a good look for the Italian stallion, but I will say that over the years, Oscar does hold up pretty well. It's not an amazing movie by any means, but I don't think it deserves all of its hate. However, 1992 would bring the notoriously mocked action comedy Stop or My Mom Will Shoot with Golden Girl Estelle Getty. Apparently, Stallone only took this role on because he heard rumors that Arnold was interested in it. There was a huge rivalry between them at the time, and Arnold knew this script was bad, and he only faked interest in the project with the intention of luring Stallone to it. Stop or My Mom Will Shoot would go on to limp out just a little bit more than $70 million worldwide on a $45 million budget, and to no surprise, it was critically panned. Audiences didn't really like it either once again, but there is a bit of nostalgic charm that has grown onto this film over the years, for me at least, and be on the lookout for episode 1 of Magically Ridiculous, where I'm going to dive into all the silliness of this movie, man diapers and all. So at this time, it's closing in on 1993. Stallone had signed a contract with Carolco Pictures, and if you're a fan of 80s and 90s cinema, you will know their famous logo with fond memories of some of the greatest movies and some of the worst movies from your childhood. I'm going to do a whole other video on the roller coaster adventures of Carolco Adventures in another video someday for sure, so definitely be on the lookout for that. But they hadn't gone out of business yet. They had Stallone under contract, the biggest star in Hollywood, and their plans with him was a comedy called Bartholomew vs. Neff, centering on battling neighbors, written and directed by John Hughes, that was to see him co-star opposite John Candy. Of course, this was eventually dropped. It would never come to be, but I think that movie would have either been the most amazing or the most absurd thing I've ever seen. Either way, how cool would it have been to see Stallone and John Candy in a movie together? After that, Stallone then showed interest in a couple other Carolco projects. One was a sci-fi thriller called Isobar, set to co-star Kim Basinger. It was supposed to focus on a genetically created monster that breaks loose on a runaway train. Both Ridley Scott and Roland Emmerich were at times in talks to direct this one, but after a ton of rewrites and wasted money, it was eventually scrapped as well. The next project that really piqued Stallone's interest was a film called Gale Force with Rennie Harlan attached to direct. This was supposed to see Stallone playing an ex-Navy SEAL battling it out with modern-day pirates who attack a small coastal town during a hurricane, and I'm not gonna lie, that movie sounds awesome. Carolco was really excited about this project. They funneled a lot of money into this one on acquiring the script and dropping $3 million in Rennie Harlan's lap. Millions more were spent on Harlan's requested rewrites to add larger, bigger action set pieces. Then, just 2 weeks prior to shooting with a $40 million budget and having really no idea how to create the needed special effects, Carolco heads decided to pull the plug on Gale Force. So as you can see, with these types of business practices and trying to get their films created, it made it no surprise that Carolco would eventually go bankrupt, but they hadn't done so yet. They were still kicking. They had another project in the works, one with a script that was deemed ready to shoot with a $70 million budget attached to it, so Stallone and Rennie Harlan moved on to a little movie called Cliffhanger. But it wasn't exactly smooth sailing from there. Carolco Pictures, which operated like a 13-year-old with millions of dollars, was just in a ton of debt, and Cliffhanger's budget ballooned $40 million over, so TriStar Pictures, in exchange for distribution rights in pretty much all the viable regions, agreed to float half the film's budget, and production continued. Cliffhanger would film in parts of Italy and Colorado from April to August of 1992 and would be released on May 28th in 1993. The film would open the weekend #1 with more than $16 million domestically. It would pull in more money than any non-sequel film to be released on Memorial Weekend, and it would go on to finish with more than $255 million worldwide, with international sales combined to just re-solidify Stallone as a global star. But Stallone wasn't quite done leaving his imprint on 1993 just yet, because 5 months later he would co-star with Wesley Snipes in Demolition Man, a big blockbuster sci-fi actioner that's just completely fun. It's loaded with adventure and humor. I think it's a bit ahead of its time with some of its visions of the future, and the film still holds up great today.
Enjoy your meal, sir.
Good thing I'm hungry.
Okay, well, Taco Bell didn't exactly flourish like it did in the film, but nobody's perfect. However, I will say, predicting a political office of any kind for Arnold Schwarzenegger and being right about it deserves you a lifetime of kudos.
His popularity at the time caused the 61st Amendment, which states that...
I don't want to know. Presidents.
Now, originally, Demolition Man was designed for Steven Seagal, who at the time was Warner Brothers' guy, and it was in hopes that Jean-Claude Van Damme would play Simon Phoenix. They could have potentially been in just a monumental 90s actioner together, but it of course never happened. Seagal and Van Damme notoriously were not fans of one another. Neither one of them wanted to play the villains either, so there was a shift in gears. Sylvester Stallone was then offered the project. He initially passed on it, but liking the idea of a villain that would give a movie two equal opponents really did pique his interest, so he came back around and script rewrites began.
Thanks a lot, you shit.
So with Sly on board, he really wanted Jackie Chan to play Simon Phoenix, and they got along great off screen, but at the time Chan just didn't feel comfortable with playing a villain. Wesley Snipes had also passed on the role a few times as well, but when producer Joel Silver and director Marco Brambilla visited Snipes on the set of Rising Sun and explained more about their vision of this film, Snipes then agreed. So with its two leads in place, Demolition Man would begin filming in February of 1993 with a $45 million budget. Reportedly, Stallone and Snipes got along great, but production did have its setbacks and its delays, such as some heavy LA rains. Stallone got injured for a week, and a fire on the set that would just all balloon the budget to $77 million and extend shooting into July. But they powered through, and despite the issues, Demolition Man would be released on October 8th, and it would open #1 at the box office. Critics were of course lukewarm to slightly favorable on this film, and it would go on to pull more than $58 million in the US, and it would finish with more than $159 million worldwide. And just like that, the Italian stallion Sylvester Stallone was back on top with 2 wildly entertaining movies in the top 20 at the 93 global box office. Cliffhanger would finish at #7, Demolition Man would finish at #12, and Stallone would ride this momentum throughout the 90s with many more hits than he had misses. He would slump again at the turn of the century and make yet another comeback, but that's a video for another day. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Primetime. Thank you for watching as always, guys. I really appreciate it. Be on a lookout for a fun retrospective review on Cliffhanger coming very soon. We're going to cover the movie, we're going to go behind the scenes, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So until then, thanks for watching again, guys, and I'll see you at the movies.